Okay, hello boys, hello girls. Welcome to your geography class. For most of you, this is going to be your first class in YouTube. This is a resource that I usually use so you can have some material in order to study by yourselves when we are not in a virtual session like face to face in Zoom or Teams. So today's topic is going to be really easy. I was going to actually ask you to read it from your book, from the McGraw-Hill page that I gave you. You already have your usernames and your codes, but the topic isn't really developed there. Actually, the 5 elements that we have already studied are better developed than these 6 essential elements of geography. But it doesn't matter. We can see it here and we can use the book for other topics. This is actually going to be pretty easy for you because you already understand the 5 elements or themes of geography. And this is just another way to see the same thing. This is another way to characterize geography. So this is going to be pretty simple. The only thing that I am going to ask you to do is to take notes because this is also going to be asked to you. Yes, I am also going to ask you the 6 essentials of geography. So let's start. It is really easy. Just take notes of whatever seems important to you, right? The definitions mostly. So let's start. The first definition over here. First, let's take a look to these 6 essential elements of geography. This is basically more or less the same thing as the 5 elements that we have already studied, but they are like another point of view. It has a couple of complementary things that we can use in order to understand this. So let's start. The first one over here, you can see 1 to 6. The first one is the world in spatial terms. So if we read over here the small definition, it says using various tools like maps, GPS, satellite images to study the world, explaining why people and places are where they are. Well, this second part of the world in spatial terms, explaining why people and places are where they are, this is pretty complex, and we will rather study that in economic geography, because, well, basically humans inhabit most of the world, but of course they are going to be choosing certain places for certain things. For example, you cannot have a place for building boats in the desert, right? You want a place for building boats near to the ocean or to some river. That is pretty obvious. And for example, if you want to have some place to produce paper, you need to have a water source close by. So these are all things that are more related to economy, because in other terms, people do actually inhabit most of the world. But what I want us to think over here is the first idea, using various tools like maps, GPS, satellite images to study the world. This is actually pretty interesting. Why? Let's think about this, and let's think about what we already know. For example, you have over here a picture of your school. And if you use maps, GPS, satellites in order to know its location, and we are of course talking about absolute location, you will find that the coordinates are 19.52 degrees latitude. So that is a positive sign because we are above the equator, we are in the north cone, and minus 99.23 degrees longitude. So that is a negative magnitude because we are to the left or to the west of Greenwich, right? But, well, this would be like a very simple way to find the school. But let me ask you something. What if you would like to find your classroom? Would it be as easy to represent the location, the absolute location of your classroom using this system? Or if you would like to represent or to find your exact spot within the classroom, like precisely where you sit, would it be as easy to represent that with this system? And if you want to know the absolute location of the person that sits right next to you, would this system be useful? I am going to read you a very brief part of this book, which is also called a brief history of time, by Mr. Stephen Hawking, who died a couple of years ago. I don't remember exactly the date, but Well, as you know, he was a very famous physicist, and he was an astronomist. So he would study space, like in general terms, not only space within Earth, but outer space, right? Like the galaxies and the universe and the solar system. So I am going to read a couple of lines for you, and luckily for us, this book is actually in English, so it will be very good for our class, which is also in English. But these are just a couple of things that Mr. Stephen Hawking has to say about space. So it says over here, I am starting reading now. It is a matter of common experience that one can describe the position of a point in space by three numbers or coordinates. Just a side note, boys, and girls, we said that we are using latitude and longitude to find a place, but we have a third coordinate, right? That is altitude. For example, Mexico City is 2,500 meters above the sea level. But we're going to be studying this third coordinate when we study climate. Altitude is highly relevant for climate. For location, these two coordinates are more than enough, latitude and longitude, but let's keep reading. For instance, one can say that a point in a room is 7 feet from one wall, 3 feet from another, and 5 feet above the floor. Or one could specify that a point was at a certain latitude and longitude and a certain height above the sea level. So he's saying something very interesting here, because if you remember, absolute location is precisely about coordinates. So this is what he's saying: certain latitude and longitude and certain height above the sea level. But previously he's using other type of absolute location, right? Like he's using coordinates, but he's not using latitude and longitude. He's saying one can say that a point in a room is 7 feet from one wall, 3 feet from another, and 5 feet above the floor. So this is more or less a relative location, right? Because he's using other places like the wall and the floor in order to locate a specific point in a room. So this is very interesting, and I will explain further later, but let's keep reading for now. One is free to use any three suitable coordinates, although they have only a limited range of validity. This is really, really important. It doesn't matter the system that we use, it has a limited range of validity. One would not specify the position of the moon in terms of miles north and miles west of Piccadilly and feet above the sea level. Instead, one might describe it in terms of distance from the sun, distance from the planet of the orbits of the planets, distance from the plane of the orbits of the planets, and the angle between the line joining the moon to the sun and the line joining the sun to a nearby star such as Alpha Centauri. Even these coordinates would not be much use in describing the position of the sun in our galaxy, or the position of our galaxy in the local group of galaxies. In fact, one may describe the whole universe in terms of a collection of overlapping patches. In each patch, one can use different set of three coordinates to specify the position of a point. An event is something that happens at a particular point in space and a particular time, so one can specify it by four numbers or coordinates. Again, the choice of coordinates is arbitrary. One can use any three well-defined spatial coordinates and any measure of time. In relativity, there is no real distinction between the space and time coordinates, just as there is no real difference between any two space coordinates. One could choose a new set of coordinates in which, say, the first space coordinate was a combination of the old first and second space coordinates. For instance, instead of measuring the position of a point on the Earth in miles north of Piccadilly and miles west of Piccadilly, one could use miles northeast of Piccadilly and miles northwest of Piccadilly. Similarly, in relativity, one could use a new time coordinate that was the old time in seconds, plus the distance in light seconds, north of Piccadilly. So perhaps this seems a bit complex, but this has to do with the first question that I ask you. So it is really easy to find Maddox School using these coordinates, right? 19 degrees latitude and minus 99.23 degrees longitude. But if I want to find a defined spot in the classroom, as I was telling you, perhaps the place where you sit, your desk and your chair, or the place of your friend right next to you, this system wouldn't be so great, right? It wouldn't be so easy to represent places so close by using this grid system, because this grid system is used to find points in the planet, like the scale in which this system is valid is a planetary scale. So if you really want to find very specific points in space, you would rather use another system. As Mr. Stephen Hawking was saying, perhaps you would say, my place is 2 feet from the desk of the teacher and 3 feet from the window, and my friend's place is 4 feet from the teacher's place and 7 feet from the window. So what I am trying to tell you, girls and boys, and what I want you to understand is that we use absolute location just as a name, because no absolute location is actually absolute. All location is relative. You are using, as we said, relative location is using other places or things as reference of the location of the place that we want to find. But relative location is also using just a reference, and this reference is pretty much depending on the scale that you want to see things. If you are seeing something really broad, as Mr. Stephen Hawking is saying, the distance to the moon, you cannot use the grid system. It would be completely useless. But if you want to find something really, really small, like the difference in location between your chair and the chair of the guy sitting right next to you, this system also wouldn't be so accurate. So just remember, absolute location is just a name. All locations are relative to the size, to the scale of observation, but there is nothing absolute in the way that we measure space or time. We just have different scales of observation for this, and perhaps you will understand better what is a scale of observation in our next history class. Just remember, absolute location is about latitude and longitude, but it is just a point of reference. It is not absolute at all. It is just a name, okay? So number 2 is pretty easy. You already know this one. Places and region. Common characteristics that certain populated places share. We create regions to group people, places together that share these common characteristics. For example, you have in here a map of a cultural region. We're going to be studying this cultural region in the 3rd trimester. And well, let me show you over here in the screen. This cultural region over here is called Mesoamerica, and it is everything inside the red line that I am drawing just now. And this cultural region shares a lot of things. You're going to see which things. Of course, it is related with some uses and customs. It is related to some ways of measuring time. They are related between each other in certain ways of writing things and representing things. They are related between each other in ways of numbers, how they count things. All of these things are elements that we may use to define Middle America or Mesoamerica as a region. But we can also go smaller even, and we can say that within Mesoamerica we have 5 or 6 smaller regions. This depends on the author. Some people actually I do believe that we do not have enough elements to say that these are 2 separate regions. Most of the time this is just the Oaxaca region, but well, it is okay if you have the criteria that you are using and you really know why you are making a difference between Oaxaca and Guerrero, then this is valid. But over here what you need to notice is, again, the scale of a region is pretty relative, right? Because even inside Oaxaca we can find smaller regions like the Mixteca region or the Zapotec region or the Mije region, and we're going to go smaller and smaller and smaller. So we can really change the size of our regions, and this is all going to be depending on the scale of observation, and the scale of observation is going to depend on what you want to study. So the scale of observation is always up to you. Again, over here, if what you want to study is something like a big place, then your scale of observation is fine. It is fine if you use the grid system, but if what you want to find out is something really, really small, like the difference in location between your chair and the chair of your classmates, perhaps you need another system of reference. And over here it is the same thing. If you want to study something very, very broad, like Mesoamerica, then the size is okay, and you're going to have some defined characteristics that will allow you to think about this. But if you want to think in more precise things, on more accurate things, then you're going to go smaller and smaller and smaller. For example, over here you have the Maya region, right? But within the Maya region, perhaps you want to think about the Mayas of the mountains, like in Chiapas, Tojolabales, for example, the Chamulas, and all the people that live in the mountains and are also Mayan people. But you can also think of the northern region, that is the peninsula region, that has very, very different characteristics from the southern region. We are actually going to see that what we really can call Mayan culture is down here in the southern region, and we're used to thinking about the Mayas in the upper region, right, like Chichen Itza. But this region was populated very late in time, and they are not the best examples actually of what the Maya culture is. The best examples are right over here, like Calakmul, Tikal, over here too, Palenque in Chiapas. We can think about Yaxchilan, and right in the border between Guatemala and Chiapas. We can think, all the way down over here in Honduras. We can think about Copan, sorry. So this southern region is actually the classic region of the Mayas, and we usually think it in the north. But again, the region that you want to use and the size of the region that you want to use, that depends on what you are going to try to study. But remember, a region is just a group of places that share something. And what do they share? That depends on what you want to study. Then physical systems. Perhaps here we also want to stop a bit, because we need to understand what is a system. We use systems a lot of times in our lives, that word system. But what is a system? Well, a system is a collection of elements with a very special characteristic. These elements are related to each other. They have relations. They interact between each other. If you only have the elements, then that is not a system. That is perhaps just a set or a group. You have a system when these elements are related to each other, when they interact. So, for example, over here it says physical systems, of course, is related to matters of the earth, right? Or of the atmosphere. We're still not talking about humans over here. We're just talking about the physical aspect of geography. So over here it says, for example, physical system. Earth's surface is shaped by processes such as erosion, volcanic eruptions, and the movement of glaciers. Ecosystems like tropical rainforests are where they are for a reason. So what's that reason? Well, we may think about several examples of physical systems, right? For example, over here we have continental drift. And I don't know if you know this, we're going to study this later on, but continental drift is actually just a theory that we use in order to try to explain some things. For example, over here you have the three types of continental movement, of plate movement that we may find in the world. So this is divergence, convergence, and transform. But when plates collide, when we have convergence, then mountains are going to be found. So over here, over here we can think that in all these blue spaces that are being formed now by the divergence, so by the plates moving away from each other, they are going to leave some evidence that they were once united together, and those evidences are going to be mountains. So for example, over here we can I am going to draw this. We can find some mountains over here that actually are the same as some mountains over here, and also they are related to some mountains over here. So what we may think is that all these places were once together, and that these lines were once joined in one same mountain range, right? So these pieces that we have over here, these pieces of mountain and the moment in which they were formed, will allow us to think that all these places were once together. But again, if we look at this map and we think, well, why are rainforests in the place that they are? Of course, this is because of latitude, longitude, and altitude, right? Because if we think about the biggest rainforest that there is, that is the Amazon rainforest, it is in the equatorial line, right? And all around the world, if you look to the equatorial line, you're going to see these very green parts. For example, Southeast Asia, India, the central part of Africa, that is actually going to have jungle, and they have jungle, and we have this pretty nice climate because we are very close to the equator. So that is why we're always going to be finding this relation between the physical systems and what we are able to see about the Earth's surface and how they change, how they are related. That is why they are systems, because they aren't just elements that work apart from each other. They are related, they interact, and we have consequences of these interactions. Then we have human systems. So this is another very nice way of systems, because again, if we have a human system, that means that the elements are humans and the relations are social relations, right? So over here you have another picture of a very famous anthropologist, and this is Bronislaw Malinowski. He wasn't half the anthropologist that Mr. Evans Pritchard was, but perhaps he is quite more famous. He is one of the most famous anthropologists ever, and nobody knows why, because he wasn't quite a good anthropologist. But he was studying this tribe that are called the Trobriand, and we're going to study the Trobriand people when we study economics. Why? Because over here it says trade with other groups is vital for survival and growth. So they are talking about economics, right? However, tribes have a very different way of understanding economics, and we usually do not understand this way. Actually, if you look at geography books, they are going to tell you that traditional economy is just about exchanging goods for other goods and exchanging services for other services. But that is not the case. Actually, traditional systems are pretty complex, and they are really worth researching about. But this is also a part of economic geography, so that is why this is a part of the 6 essential elements of geography: how human systems interact within themselves and also with other human systems. And of course, we have the one that you already know and that we have studied as human-environment interaction. So environment and society, this is the name that in the 6 essential elements of geography, it would receive human-environment interaction in the 5 elements of geography. So again, this is just another way to see the 5 elements that we already have studied. They are more or less the same, but as you can see, we have some peculiarities, right? So again, environment and society, humans constantly modify or change their environment in an attempt to improve their surroundings, and physical systems like mountains, deserts influence where they live. So we have already seen this, right? For example, remember the Nuer people. They are going to be moving around in order to find resources. But some societies, as we are going to be studying in history, as Egypt or Mesopotamia or a lot of other societies, they aren't going to be moving around to get resources. They are going to modify the environment to get those resources. So perhaps they are going to change the course of the rivers in order to get the water. And they are not going to be moving around to find water. They are going to move the river to their cities, right? So this is another way of human environment interaction. So that is also very interesting and is another point of study of geography and of history and of anthropology. And why am I saying this? Precisely because of this last point. The uses of geography. Archaeologists study artifacts to learn about past civilizations. We're going to see in these courses that this word civilization is not going to be used anymore by us. At least not by us. Why? We need to understand that civilization is a pretty racist word that was developed in the 19th century in order to say that some countries are civilized, that they are civil, and that other societies, such as tribes, such as chiefdoms, such as phratries, such as clans, such as hordes, that they are not civilized people, that they are savage or barbarians. So we're not going to use this word anymore because, well, all they are trying to mean is that they are people that are organized in certain way. That is, of course, not the tribe, but the state. Do not worry about that. This will be the main focus of study of our history course this trimester, and that they live in a certain way, which is in cities, while tribes live in villages, right? But again, we're going to see that in history. But why am I showing you these pictures? Well, because there is... these are like the two main points of view that you may find not only about geography but about science itself. Over here you have an example. Why do we want to study geography? Well, to plan things, right? We can get some knowledge about the environment, about human systems, about how we interact, and then we can plan our cities better, right? And have better resources and make less damage to the environment. That is one way of seeing things. We can study geography in order to improve things, to apply geography and what we know about geography to our lives. However, there is another point of view, sorry about this, and this point of view was given by this other handsome, right? Another anthropologist, of course, because we, all the anthropologists, are very handsome. But before being an anthropologist, he was a geographer. And actually, we will see throughout the course that anthropology and geography are actually very, very similar to each other. The main difference is that we anthropologists do not quite study a lot the physical aspect. The physical aspect is still something very geographical. We take it into consideration, but we somehow borrow it from geography. And all these cultural elements and economical elements, many times geography borrows from anthropology or sociology or history, right? But as I have told you many times, you shouldn't understand knowledge as something that is spread apart. We should understand knowledge as one same thing, and we should take into consideration everything that the different sciences have to tell us in order to develop new knowledge. But what is important, and the point that I wanted to tell you about here, is that Franz Boas actually wrote a lot about geography. He wrote a lot of papers, and in one of those papers he was asking himself this question: why do we study geography? And his answer was actually pretty interesting. It is pretty first world, right? It is pretty rich people, but it is actually valid, and it is really interesting, because his answer was, in order to know things, we should study, science should be devoted to studying things in order to know things, not in order to apply things, because, we cannot really know if what we know is right, so perhaps we are applying it in a wrong way. We should bother in understanding things. The only point for studying should be studying. So you have 2 points of view here. You have the point of view in which geography may be applied in order to do something, and you have the point of view that is also pretty valid and that is quite correct, in which you are saying, I study geography because I want to know things and I want to develop new knowledge, not because I want to make a model of a city and make a more sustainable model of city. You may do that, yes, but you may also be interested in knowing about geography because you want to know things, and that was the point of view of Franz Boas. So again, boys, and girls, these were the 6 essential elements of geography, and they are just another way of thinking about geography, just as the 5 elements that we saw. They just have, they are like, let's say, just another way of seeing these things, but they are very, very similar. They only have some peculiar things, yes, but as you can see, space is very important in terms of location, places and regions, physical systems. At least we can understand what is a system now, right? Not only elements, but elements joined together, working together, right? That is a system. Elements or parts and relations, that makes a system. Now, human systems, environment and society, the uses of geography. Yes, boys and girls, so I hope this video was good for you in order to make some notes, and we'll see you next class. Okay, hello boys, hello girls, welcome to your geography class. For most of you, this